Hello, this is the lesson read aloud for Unit 3, Lesson 10, Economic and Political Nationalism. In the years following the War of 1812, the new nation grew, and so did the federal government. New states entered the Union, and strong political figures emerged, as did new economic opportunities and dangers. A spirit of nationalism swept the country as Americans, at least for a short time, agreed to compromise on key issues. Some problems, though, could not be solved through compromise, and there were those who saw storm clouds on the horizon. So remember to go to lesson resources and grab your reading guide and lesson answer key. And let's read through the goals for the lesson. Explain the role of the Supreme Court in interpreting the law. Identify John C. Marshall and his influence on the power of the Supreme Court. Explain the goals and provisions of the Missouri Compromise and those who supported it. Identify John C. Marshall and his influence on the power and role of the Supreme Court in its major cases during the early 1800s. Recognize major foreign policy issues and events of the early 1800s, including boundary changes, relations with Native Americans, and the Monroe Doctrine. Identify Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and John C. Calhoun and their goals. Recognize the issues and outcomes of major Supreme Court cases of the early 1800s, and explain the goals, issues, and provisions of the Missouri Compromise. Okay, get your lesson resources and let's begin. We will be reading pages. Let's see what pages. 244 through 252. All right, so let's get started. New economic opportunities. The economic expansion that followed on the heels of the War of 1812 gave many Americans another reason to feel triumphant about their destiny. During the war, when American merchants found themselves cut off from Atlantic trade, some along the eastern seaboard turned to manufacturing. As the flow of cheap British imports dwindled, small American workshops busily turned out everything from nails and horseshoes to more complex items like clocks and rifles. A new class of entrepreneurs emerged, and many grew wealthy from their business ventures. Some businessmen exploited recently arrived immigrants from Ireland and England who were willing to work for very low wages. After the war, European demand for American agricultural products dramatically increased. Seaports like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore grew rapidly. Fast packet ships raced between New York and Liverpool. Sturdy brick and glass storefronts popped up on busy main streets. New shopping areas like Boston's Quincy Market and Philadelphia's Chestnut Street gave a rising middle class a place to purchase consumer goods such as silverware, dishes, and wallpaper. Manufacturing and investment led to growth in the countryside as well. Textile mills sprang up along rivers that powered the new spinning and weaving equipment that processed raw cotton into fabric. Other textile mills produced wool and cloth and encouraged a boom in sheep raising. In Vermont by 1840, sheep outnumbered people by a ratio of more than 5 to 1. In the northern and mid-Atlantic states, a robust agricultural system thrived. Profit-minded farmers stripped the land clean of trees, planting cash crops such as wheat and grazing livestock. And then just read this little thing about John Jacob Astor. It's kind of interesting. Wherever they could, many turned to raising cattle to provide leather for the new shoe factories. As growing urban populations in the coastal cities demanded more dairy products, many farmers in New England, New York, and Pennsylvania shifted from growing wheat to producing milk, butter, and cheese. As farmers sold their products to ever larger markets, they bought new fancy goods, everything from brass buttons to women's hats. As New England's textile business boomed and northern agricultural prospered, southern cotton plantations exploded in number and size. After 1815, when peace unleashed the demand for cotton, commodity prices rose worldwide. In response, production soared. The United States produced 3,000 bales of cotton in 1790. By 1820, annual cotton output had increased to 300,000 bales. Cotton soon became America's biggest export. The dramatic expansion of cotton production deeply shaped life in the South. Slaves, the backbone of the southern labor force, were forced to work from sunup to sundown. As the plantation system boomed, slavery, which Southerners began to call a peculiar institution, peculiar meaning distinctive, became even more firmly rooted. Slave-produced cotton made many slave owners rich. It also provided northern textile factories with handsome profits. Westward movement and sectionalism. In 1811, in an effort to link distinct sections of the vast nation, the United States started building a road across the Appalachian Mountains. This national road aimed to connect Baltimore to Ohio, linking major rivers such as the Ohio and the Mississippi to cities on the East Coast. Americans, most of them still farmers, needed an affordable way to move their crops to market. Developing a better transportation With the population moving steadily westward, developing a better transportation network seemed like a patriotic duty. The National Road proved a great success, but it was an exception to the rule. Major turnpikes often went bust. They depended upon tolls which could easily be avoided. Travelers would quietly pass the toll houses at night or go around them on secret roads known as shunpikes. Other forms of transportation were needed to knit the country together. Water travel was one option. At this time, it was far cheaper and quicker to move goods and people by water than by land. So while turnpikes were being built, teams of laborers dug canals and expanded rivers. The construction of numerous canals made it easier for more and more settlers to head east. The following chapter presents a detailed account of the Erie Canal. Moving west was not easy. Determined settlers in covered wagons struggled along rutted country roads. Families like the Lincolns, who came up to Indiana from Kentucky in 1816, pitched camp in the middle of the woods and struggled to survive. Abraham Lincoln later remembered the rigors of his frontier childhood in a poem. When first my father settled here, 'twas then the frontier line. The panthers screamed, filled night with fear, and bears preyed on the swine. And here's just a map showing regional economic development in 1820. I'm just giving a visual of some of the industries and the routes that were being developed in the United States. Okay, next page. A growing population in new states. Undaunted, Americans continued moving west in greater numbers. As they settled down, they expanded their families to handle the tough duties of farm life. Between 1800 and 1820, the population of the country nearly doubled, from just over 5 million to close to 10 million people. As one congressman joked, "I invite you to go to the West and visit one of our log cabins and number its inmates. There you will find a strong, stout youth of 18 with his better half, just commencing the first struggles of independent life. 30 years from that time, visit them again, and instead of 2, you will find in the same family 22. That is what I call the American multiplication table." From 1816 to 1821, migrants from the Northeast and South settled undeveloped regions, so many that 6 new states entered the Union. 5 new states pushed the nation's boundaries to the west: Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, Alabama, and Missouri. The 6th new state was Maine, which at the time was frontier territory. At the start of the 1800s, only a few 100,000 non-Indians lived west of the Appalachian Mountains. By 1820, the figure is more than 2 million. They planted wheat and corn and raised hogs. They cleared trees where necessary and replaced their shacks with log cabins when they could. Where the climate permitted, they planted rows of cotton. The issue of slavery reflected the major patterns of settlement. In new Midwestern states such as Illinois and Indiana, the Northwest Ordinance prohibited slavery. In new southern states such as Mississippi and Alabama, whites brought their slaves with them to work the fields. Slaves were forced to drain swamplands, clear forests, and then plant cotton. As the price of cotton rose, owners purchased more slaves and the brutal system expanded. The Missouri Compromise. Americans were on the move, expanding, producing, and thriving. Then the nation suddenly found itself divided by a familiar question. Bitter disagreements over slavery prompted sectionalism, loyalty to one's own region, and threatened national unity. Ever since declaring their independence, Americans had argued over slavery. Although the northern states had taken steps to end the practice, the question of slavery in the West remained. Should the new territories, when they attained statehood, be free or slave states? On February 13, 1819, an obscure congressman from Poughkeepsie, New York, put a proposition forward that led to a major crisis. The territory of Missouri had just applied for statehood. Although 10,000 slaves already lived there, Representative James Tallmadge was determined to prevent Missouri from becoming a slave state. He offered a resolution that banned the further importation of slaves into the new state. His resolution also stipulated that all slaves born in Missouri after statehood would be freed when they turned 25. Tallmadge's resolution sparked a major confrontation. It was passed by the House of Representatives over the objections of Southern congressmen, but it died in the Senate. When Congress reconvened in December 1819, the controversy reached a fever pitch. Many in the South now believed that Northern politicians and businessmen intended to destroy slavery. While Southerners relied on slaves to produce cotton, white Southerners relied on slaves to produce cotton, they viewed anti-slavery advocates like Talmadge as a threat to their way of life. Anti-slavery Northerners, on the other hand, saw the extension of slavery in the West as contrary to the democratic ideals of the nation. And this is a map that's going to show us what the Missouri Compromise was about, but we need to read further to go through that. They also suspected the slave-holding South of trying to strengthen its power in the Senate. At the time, there was a delicate balance of power between the free and slave states. If Missouri came in as a slave state, the slave states would hold an advantage. The Missouri crisis exposed a glaring division in the country. The North was a place of rising industry and wage labor, but the South, where slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person in determining congressional representation, even though they could not vote, depended on a slave-based economy. During the Missouri debate, Northerners and Southerners began to harden their views. The clash escalated to the point that a Southern representative accused Talmadge of starting something that only seas of blood could finish. Talmadge angrily responded, "If civil war must come, I can only say, let it come." Civil war did not come. Not yet. Speaker of the House Henry Clay, earning a reputation as a great compromiser, brought the different factions together and hammered out a compromise. Luckily, Maine was applying for statehood at the same time as Missouri. By the terms of Clay's deal, Maine would enter as a free state and balance the admission of Missouri, which would be admitted as a slave state. But thereafter, according to the terms of the Missouri Compromise, slavery would be prohibited in the remaining slavery territory of the Louisiana Purchase, north of latitude 3630, Missouri's southern border. The Missouri Compromise eased sectional conflict, and for the time being, the Union remained intact. But the hostility lingered. For an aging Thomas Jefferson, the Missouri Compromise offered no solution, but merely a reprieve. The dividing line of 3630 North, he felt, will never be obliterated, and every new irritation will mark it deeper and deeper. Like a fire bell in the night, as Jefferson described it, the Missouri crisis warned of a deep sectional rift that could only end in blood. The conflict between slave labor and free labor revealed the limits of America's spirit of democratic nationalism and remained a source of intense division. So let's go back to that page here and look. So here's the line here in red, 3630 North. So the above this line was a free state, and below that, slave states, other than Missouri itself. And then it just shows this was still belonging to Spain, Spanish Mexico, Oregon Territory, unorganized over here. They didn't become states yet. Okay, so continuing back. Federal power and internal improvements. After James Madison left the White House in 1817, a rising generation of politicians brought new energy to the campaign to improve the nation's transportation and communication systems. What Madison had boldly proposed in the aftermath of the War of 1812, these new politicians would turn into a comprehensive plan to promote America's economic growth and national destiny. The most energetic of them all was Kentucky Congressman Henry Clay. Clay represented the democratic spirit of the age. Losing his father at a young age, he saw himself as a self-made man. When he was 20, he moved from Virginia to the Kentucky frontier, a wild, unsettled place occupied by rugged, dirty, brawling, browbeating monsters 6 feet high, whose vocation is robbing, drinking, fighting, and terrifying every peaceful man in the community. Kentucky offered Clay a blank slate upon which to write his own future. The tall, gangly, gregarious lad won instant popularity in Congress, where he was promptly voted Speaker of the House of Representatives. Even his rivals were entranced. Said John C. Calhoun, "I don't like Clay. He is a bad man, an impostor, a creator of wicked schemes. I wouldn't speak to him, but by God, I love him." And we'll stop here with this one part and start up in part 2 with the American system.